Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, May 16th, 2025. Time to get going once again. And Donald Trump is he's out of the country. I guess that's a good thing. And so we've got that going for us, which is nice. But he flies back today, I understand, which means lots and lots of time on the crappy, decrepit, I hate Air Force One plane. And that means lots of babbling to the press, probably a bunch of video at some point about something crazy that he said and how he's going to take over the world with monster battle bots. I don't know. We'll see where his mind wanders today. Bad news on the front of the random country selector that I use in the morning post, just to tell everybody over at Daily Coast that the show is going on live. And I randomly spin the wheel and pick a country, and we watch to see whether or not at some point we are threatening to invade that country. I don't know if I ever made any rules about what would happen if we actually invaded on that day. It's really mostly about threats to invade. And now I've been playing it long enough that now the question becomes, do I eliminate from the pool countries that have come up before, or really we just ought to be saying, it can absolutely happen that we threaten to, you would assume that if we were serious about invading a country, or just serious about threatening the invasion, we would start threatening it on several days in a row. So maybe whatever the random generator comes up with is just the answer. And I had been pushing it again and saying, well, all right, this one already came up. Well, anyway, now, of course, we're really in trouble. Like the last couple days have been pretty wild selections anyway, and then I pushed it to give me a different answer. Like the other day was Israel, and I said, well, that had already come up. But of course, now why not just note for the record that we may end up invading that too, because why the hell not? Anyway, today is South Africa, and we're not having a real good current relationship with the government of South Africa, and we are, I think, rather provocatively, both in this country and probably in South Africa, waving South African Boer settlers through as refugees. They look very hungry, many of them. And so I don't know that's casus belli, right? Or casus belli. I don't know how you would pronounce it exactly. I'm not a Latin speaker. Very few people are. With the South Africans, however, we could turn it into anything. Well, we're going to come here and teach you a lesson. What if we started to have too many such settlers? And you need to stop them at the border. You need to change conditions in South Africa such that these poor people are not forced to flee your country and can instead shelter in place. This is your problem. And we're going to go to war with you and devastate your government and economy so that fewer people will feel like they need to flee as refugees. That rarely works, but that's our Trump. We may be stuck with it. All right, got to catch up on a couple of things today. There's plenty of long read material that we should probably catch up on. A few things we need to double back on and fill in the blanks. I guess the big hole in yesterday's coverage, which I think, again, was a matter of, hey, these stories came out after our show was done for the day. But, the way the news cycle is, now feels like old news. But they may already have been in pocket, and maybe yesterday we had them, and I just didn't get to them because, that's the way the show went yesterday. But I'm going to take this as a cool cue. I got a Blue Sky message from, well, we're gonna ponder how you say it out loud. And the spelling is MS Medic, all one word, of course, because that's the way our handles are on Blue Sky, which I'm going to assume is either Ms. Medic, or you're from Mississippi, or both. I'm not sure, or Microsoft Medic. I don't know. It's probably not it. The S is lowercase, so I'm going to go with Ms. Medic, and Ms. Medic has this item, which is borrowed from Mediaite, covering Chris Hayes, covering the story of the continuing story. What was that from? Is that a Muppet Show thing? Anyway, continuing story of the Pimpmobile plane. And there's still, believe it or not, still things to bring up about that. Besides this latest hot thing, which it'd be difficult for me to just, it wouldn't be difficult, but it would be difficult for me to legally just steal the material right off of Chris Hayes and let him tell you the story. Also, then you would say, I should just watch his show instead of listening to this show. But I do have some pocketed material on this. The plane, what do you want me to say? The plane sucks. Basically, that's it. The new story on this is, it is a white elephant that the Qatari royal family has been saddled with this. They have a fleet of these things. And they've just basically decided, they're really not that efficient. They're cool and souped up and makes us look super rich, and that's great. But for the traveling that we do, I don't know, maybe 16 of them is enough. And we should sell off the 17th one. And they're big and they require really long airstrips, and they've got regional jets that they can fly on. They're overly opulent. They're a pain in the ass to keep up. They rip through fuel. I mean, they just chug aviation fuel, I'm sure, which, for a petrostate, what do we care? But anyway, they're expensive and as it turns out, somewhat difficult to get rid of. The plane has actually been on the market for some time, and no one will buy it because it's enormously expensive. And, the price of operation is huge, and there's just no upside in having it, really. So, of course, they said, who's stupid enough to accept this even as a gift, knowing that the overhead costs of operating this thing would be enormous, and that, nobody in the actual market wants it. And of course, the answer there is Donald Trump, because he loves opulence. So he would love to take it, and he might even try to justify it. And I guess probably the market for finding a sucker is also pretty limited to, I guess you would put it this way. Even if you don't want to label the person who takes it as stupid, you want to look for a person who says, well, it would be stupid to take it on as a private ownership thing, which, of course, that's the design. Remember, after a couple of years, well, then it becomes privately yours because it goes to your library and you'll use it. But really what they're looking for is someone stupid enough to take it, but someone also audacious enough to say, I'm going to make some other entity pay for it. It's way too expensive for an actual person to say, yeah, in this economy, you're going to take this plane and operate and maintain this plane? Well, probably not, because it's so expensive. However, if he could stick the bill with American taxpayers, then that would be something, or even donors later on. So that might be what's behind it. So there's a couple of articles about that will fill in the blanks and give you some additional color on this thing. And this one I've got here from Forbes. Let's see whether it's readable or not. Why the Qataris are happy to dump their 747 on Trump. Why not dump on Trump? It's a great idea. And here's the Forbes version of it. Jeremy Bogaiski has put this one together. Senior editor. They're covering aerospace and defense. So I guess that's sort of his beat. What's the outrageous corruption plus stupid consumerism or socialism, stealing from the government to pay for your opulence? That's not actually socialism, but that's sometimes the upshot, or certainly the accusation that conservatives make about socialism. Anyways, the president may be thirsting, that's about the right word for it, for a new 4-engine jumbo jet. But many governments and royal families are unloading their fuel-guzzling palaces in the sky. And the suggestion here is that one such royal family is this one, and one such plane is this one. The royal family of Qatar owner of one of the largest private jet fleets in the world, has been quietly getting rid of some of its biggest planes. It may have found the perfect taker for one of its Boeing 747 jumbo jets in President Donald Trump, who has been frustrated with the multi-year delays in replacing Air Force One. And I'm sure that's frustrating. But as we mentioned, I think earlier in this saga, earlier in the week, it will take just as long, if not longer, to retrofit this one into Air Force One condition as to wait on the delivery from Boeing on the new one. Not that that'll concern him, and not that I'm particularly concerned if he flies around in an undefended plane. But whatever. Watch out. You can't say that because something. Another story percolating up today. Everyone, have you all seen this one? Just to divert immediately for a few minutes. It's an airplane, right? I'm diverting you, putting you in a holding pattern. What's his name? James Comey, who no one loves, apparently, finds himself on the beach with lots of time on his hands, I guess, and apparently arranged some seashells, it looks like, into the numbers 86 and 47, like 8647, which is actually a little off, right? As I understand it, originally 86 is like the restaurant code for like we're out of this stuff, which sort of became like take it off the menu board or whatever and stop telling people we have it or whatever it is. And it also kind of slipped into slang as get rid of. 86 it. Get rid of it. Take it off the board, I guess. So 8647, right? All right, harmless little stupid joke or whatever. But the Republicans have got it in their head. They can try and inflate this into, not conflate this, but inflate this into a death threat. James Comey is threatening to assassinate or asking someone else to assassinate Donald Trump by arranging seashells in the pattern of 8647. And it's ridiculous and all, but Kash Patel is spending his time as director of the FBI tweeting that we're going to be looking into this. So, all right. And of course, probably a dozen or more Trumpy influencers spent some portion of the last couple of years tweeting 8646, including Jack Posobiec, who did, in fact, tweet that out, 8646. And then that's now being displayed side by side with his new tweet saying, yeah, we got to look into this assassination threat. How dare you, James Comey? Anyway, back on the plane, while many have speculated that the Qataris have offered Trump the luxurious plane to curry favor with the famously transactional president, that's certainly true, there may be a simpler rationale. They just don't want it anymore, and no one will buy it. I'm sure they'll talk about up here. The Royals have failed to sell the plane, which was put on the market in 2020. And I mean, what a cry. I wonder what kind of demand there was for private jets when people were trying to avoid crowds and COVID was at its peak, or at least the fear of COVID was at its peak. Anyway, they put it on the market in 2020, never sold it. It's been 5 years. That all according to an archived listing linked herein. Giving it away could save Qatar's rulers a big chunk of change on maintenance and storage costs, aviation experts told Forbes. Making Trump happy would be an added bonus. Qatar, which has given away another blinged out 747 and may have mothballed 2 more, epitomizes the fading demand for these huge, fuel-guzzling, highly personalized airplanes. There aren't many who want to buy them, and many of the governments and royal families who own them have been trying to ditch them over the past decade. I guess if it was up to me, and well, I guess if you had unlimited resources, you take one. Why not? But if you are limited, right, you want a smaller jet, a little thing that can land at smaller airfields, much more flexibility in terms of going places on a whim, which, if you're not making a state visit someplace, you probably would prefer. Anyway, Qatar, like many modern states, let's say this. Qatar has, in this case, faces similar pressures that modern states face, despite the fact that it's not really a modern state. is shifting toward leaner, more versatile aircraft, which offer better economics and more discreet presence for official travel. Linus Bauer, managing director of the Dubai-based aviation consulting firm BAA & Partners. I guess in Dubai he has to say that Qatar is a modern state, and Dubai certainly, their cities certainly appear modern, even if their practices behind the scenes are not. I mean, it's a monarchy, so come on. Anyway, giving the plane to Trump would be a creative disposal strategy that marks a farewell to a bygone era of geopolitical theater in the skies, which I don't think ever, really existed for anybody, but these guys. The arid peninsula off Saudi Arabia in the Persian Gulf, a peninsula off of the Arabian Peninsula, really, similar in size to Connecticut. Hi, Greg. Boasts deep reserves of oil and gas that have made the country the fourth wealthiest in the world per capita GDP, and enriched its rulers, the House of Thani, Thani. The family has plowed some of their wealth into an extravagant fleet of roughly a dozen Airbus and Boeing airliners converted into luxurious rides for a small number of passengers, as well as smaller business jets from Bombardier to Dassault. I don't know if I've ever heard of that one. It's really assault with D in front of it. Dassault. Past assault, or I've just been desalted. I don't know. Anyway, but it may be Dassault. I'm not sure who's making it. Anyway, if we're going to say Bombardier, then we'll say Dassault. Anyway, that includes the 747 coveted by Trump, which was given the tail number A7HBJ. Why HBJ? Those are the initials of billionaire Hamid bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani, who served as Prime Minister of Qatar from 2007 to 2013. It's one of three 747-8s currently in the Royal Air Fleet, three of them, which is managed by an entity called Qatar Amiri Flight. When the plane was bought in 2012, the list price was $367 million, not including the interior, which took 3 years to complete and likely costs tens of millions of dollars, or cost at the time. And it's a little dated looking, but it's luxurious. I'd fly in it if I were flying someplace and it was the same price as a regular ticket. Sure. Unlike and note also here, it took them 3 years to trick out the interior. So that's just putting fancy stuff in it. How you are going to put electronics and defensive systems in to make it an Air Force One, I have no idea. Here comes the rain. Still here and still waiting on the gutter guys to come here and get this thing cleaned out. But the birds are loving it. They are bathing in the in this stuffed gutter. Unlike the passenger version of the 747-8, which can seat 467 people, like cattle, I guess, the HBJ jet is a flying mansion designed for just 89 passengers, 2 bedrooms, entertainment, meeting rooms, sumptuous beige and cream-colored interior. They have some nice pictures here. And some more detail about the garbage is in here. Parisian design house, created by the Parisian design house Cabinet Pinto, which I'm sure is Cabinet Pinto or something like that, that features furnishings made of sycamore. And, Wakapoo. Why do you pronounce this? Wakapou. Is that Wakapoo? I don't know. Wakapo. I've never run into that. I don't even know what it looks like. That's the wood, along with the sycamore. Silk fabrics, of course, and natural leather. Pictures of the sumptuous appointments here. It's a little weird looking. The 747, which entered service in 1970, revolutionized air travel by making long-distance air travel affordable for a mass market. Except not this way. All right, there's more about how expensive it is to own these things. But beyond poor fuel efficiency, large, ostentatious planes are a security risk. Well, we already have that going on. Notes Richard Abulafia, an aerospace consultant with the Aerodynamic Advisory. And I guess that's for buyers other than Trump, who, one, not particularly worried about security for some reason, and two, if it's an Air Force One, it's got built-in defenses. So if you are someone who doesn't have the budget or resources to put in military defense in capability into your planes, then, and you're trying to keep a low profile, that's why this thing is still on the market. No one wants it. The 747 that Qataris may give Trump only flew 1,069 hours in the 5 years before it was put on the market in 2020, according to a brochure for the plane from AMAC Aerospace, which built its interior. One of the Qataris' other two VIP 747-8s hasn't been showing up on flight tracking services, indicating it might have been pulled from active service, said Bauer. In 2018, Qatar gave a similar plane to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and offloaded an older 747 SP to an asset management firm, which appears to have put the plane in storage. So they're already paying a lot for just mothballing these things. And one of them they gave away to the Turkish president, and that's going to make Trump mad. He got one before I did, or something to that. I'm not special anymore. I'm sure they'll spend some time trying to persuade him that the one they gave to Erdogan was less luxurious. And then he'll get mad, but all right. The massive, highly customized planes with idiosyncratic interior decorating are not easy to sell. The market is incredibly illiquid for a jet like this, says Abulafia. The poster child is a lavish 747-8 commissioned for Saudi Crown Prince Sultan bin Abdulaziz Al Saud before his death in 2011. What happened to it? Scrapped for parts in 2022 with just 42 hours of flight time. Holy mackerel. So he flew on it like 5 times and then junked it. The active Saudi Royal 747 fleet is down to 1, with 2 listed as mothballed in the last 3 years. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is using smaller aircraft like the Boeing 737 and the 787-8. The 747-8 is still in high demand to carry cargo, given its huge internal volume. 2/3 of the 155 that Boeing sold were configured as freighters, including the final one that left the factory in 2023. But planes like Qatar's 747-8s are rather ill-suited to be converted into freighters, since they were structurally and mechanically optimized for long-range flight, with a few passengers and custom interiors, said Bauer. It would require gutting the interior, reinforcing the floor, cutting a cargo door, and recertifying structural integrity, an extremely expensive and complex process, so it can't even really be turned into a cargo plane. So the only thing left to do with it is give it to an idiot who doesn't care about the price. Giving the 747-8 to the U.S. would also allow the Qataris to avoid maintenance costs that are only getting higher with the 747 fleet shrinking worldwide, fewer mechanics available who know how to work on them, etc., says John Goglia, a former airline mechanic and member of the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. The 2020 sales brochure noted that the plane was due for a landing gear overhaul in 2024 and a 12-year check in 2027, a check-in in which the airplane and engines are taken apart, typically carried out every 6 to 12 years, can take months to complete and cost millions of dollars. The numbers are staggering, said Goglia. By contrast, Trump, who is incensed that Boeing is years behind schedule on a $3.9 billion contract to fit out 2 747s to serve as presidential jets, on Tuesday claimed that the Qatari plane would save American taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. Only a fool would not accept this gift on behalf of our country, Trump wrote on his social media platform, which is also a huge waste of money, Truth Social. Aerospace experts aren't so sure. The plane would need to be stripped down, swept for bugs. Then, unless the administration is willing to accept the risks of lighter security, it would need to be built up to the Air Force's requirements to serve as an airborne command center with encrypted communication systems, shielding to protect the electronics from the effect of a nuclear blast, and defenses against missiles. That's a process that Boeing, despite all its delays, is years down the road with already, with the 2 planes that it began work on in 2018 during Trump's first term. It would take at least 5 years again, starting from scratch, Abulafia estimates, unless security requirements were relaxed. I can't imagine any well-trained senior Air Force officers saying this is a good idea, he said. Democrats and some Republicans are also alarmed over the ethics, of accepting such an expensive gift from a foreign country. Boeing's target for delivery of the new presidential planes originally last year has slipped to 2028 or 29. But the company recently told the Air Force it could advance completion to 2027 if requirements are relaxed, like no wings or something. The administration tasked billionaire Elon Musk with finding ways to speed up the process, and I guess this is what he found. Boeing has struggled with problems with suppliers for interior components of the jet, the wiring design, finding workers with security clearances to work on such a sensitive project. There's a lot of problems. For Qatar, a small nation with powerful neighbors like Iran and Saudi Arabia, the potential gift is another example of how it makes liberal use of its ample financial resources to cultivate allies. Qatar has spent billions of dollars to support a garrison of 10,000 U.S. troops at its Al Udeid air base. That's where Trump visited yesterday. In fact, the largest American bastion in the Middle East, Qatar has also donated billions of dollars to U.S. universities. Remember those that they suck and we don't want them to have any money anymore. And think tanks. And establish business ties with the Trump family. That's a better deal for them. A Trump-branded golf course is in the works in Qatar, and a Qatari sovereign wealth fund has made multiple investments with Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. If Trump does take the 747, the Qataris will still have plenty of other planes to get around in their Emiri flight stable, as well as access to Qatar Airways' fleet of executive jets, notes business aviation consultant Brian Foley. I don't think they'll miss it. Probably not. All right, that's probably way more information than you really wanted about that plane, but it is delicious to sort of bask in the irony of it all, is that actually, instead of it being the most desirable plane in the whole wide world, it's the least desirable. No one wants it. It's a huge white elephant. And but that's probably even more reason for Trump to take it on. No one in the world is rich enough to be able to afford this, but I am. But that's because he'll stick us with the repair costs. It's really kind of ridiculous. Buying a used car, right? If it turns out that the engine needs to be overhauled, it needs 4 new tires and a new transmission, only a fool would not take this as a gift, except if that fool knew what was waiting for him around the corner, then he'd probably change his mind. All right, we'll be right back with more and other stories.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Coast, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Turns out I did have at least one other tip to another article. Pretty much the same thing, though. I won't have to read this one necessarily, but another description of yet another of the planes, and I guess some photos inside the one that they gave to Turkey, and that one's a little, that one's decked out in purple as well. There are really some wild decorations going on in these planes. And of course, I guess it's interesting, the limitation on the seating in these things. You want the luxurious seating, and they have lots of configurations and open conference areas and conference tables and dining configuration. But the seats have to be chunky, bolted in, and seat belted. So you end up with some really weird configurations, like the conference/formal dining room. This is a large thing, and it's set for dinner in this picture, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seats on each side, so 12, and then 13, 14 at the heads of the table. But they all, you have to sit in an airline style seat for dinner. So I don't even know how you get in or out of your seat. Like you can't pull it back, I don't think. I think they're bolted to the floor. It's just wild, and I'm not really sure how you get in and out. It makes for a very compelling picture, and you say, wow, so luxurious to have this beautiful dining room, and how cool would it be? It might be interesting to have dinner there, but I mean, unless they're power, I'm sure they're power seats, but you'd have to flip the switch and have it, roll backwards in order for you to be able to get into your seat. And if you're in one of the interior 4 chairs on either side, I just don't know how you get in there. It's highly impractical, to say the very least, not to mention way too expensive to maintain or operate, even for the Qataris. So that should be the hint, that they're giving these things away and can't sell them. All right, there's a little bit more about that. Before we transition off of the plane entirely, there was something I wanted to read you from Josh Marshall at Talking Points memo yesterday, sort of a larger step back and higher level view of what this whole incident illustrates. Personalization. I put this in the roundup yesterday, but now we'll read it. Personalization. Remember, that was like the personal rule, essentially. A system of government, a lot like monarchy, but we haven't established a monarchy and inheritance rights for the presidency just yet. But it is his personal rule. Personalization, the vastly bigger story behind the Pimpmobile jet bribe. All right, let's take a look at this one in a vertical that TPM calls the back channel. Not certain what that's about. But just before the onset of the pandemic, Josh writes, I'd started researching a longer project about the personalization of global politics, which was accelerated by, but not started by, Trump. In a way, personalization is the inevitable companion of authoritarianism and autocracy. If there's one guy who runs the show in each country, then the affairs of that state inherently become indistinguishable from that of the autocrat and his personal checkbook. Relationships between states become those of individual people, like real old-style monarchy stuff where they used to be cousins and stuff like that. Early in Biden's presidency, I spoke to one of the very high-end hedge funders who are in the class of people who get invited to the dinners and shindigs with Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto ruler of Saudish Arabia, in Riyadh. This was around the time that Jared Kushner got that huge $2 billion investment in his new post-White House fund. This source described one of those dinners to me that had occurred not long before that investment. Kushner was seated to MBS's right or left, I can't remember which, but same difference. Given how much power MBS wields and his near unilateral control over hundreds of billions of dollars, people would probably literally kill for that level of preferment and proximity. But as it was conveyed to me, everything about that weekend or series of days suggested that Jared was just MBS's guy. As in, MBS just loved Jared. And remember, Trump was out of power. And in early 2022, or possibly late 2021, it was by no means an obvious bet that he'd be returning to power. The relationship seemed to go far beyond a bet on the Trump family returning to power. Okay, that seems pretty interesting. Oh, I think I'm going to have to read this in pocket form now in order to go on with it. Oh, is this... oh, no. Well, he's figured out the... oh, okay. Well, I guess yesterday that article was more easily available to me, unfortunately. Is this the one that I deposited in my notes elsewhere? Yeah, okay, here we go. Got it. All right. I prepared ahead of time. When I was doing this initial research, I was interested in the degree to which that world, the world of the oligarchs, was stitched together not only by money, but by what in Russia they call compromat. I didn't realize we were going to be going on to compromat. I'm not trying to get back into that discourse, which was such a thing in Trump's first term, but there's a real analog. I'm talking about the use of hacking, often with the services of private companies based in Israel, to collect damaging information on rivals. It's power. It's a cudgel. But it's also a kind of way to stitch that whole world together. No one goes too rogue because everyone knows a lot about everyone else. Remember not long before when Jeff Bezos got hacked and he accused MBS of being behind it? I actually don't, but okay, I believe you. I'm definitely taking Josh's word for this one. I published that TPM reader note last night, I guess, about that, because it captured the real spectacle of the plane story. The U.S. isn't down at the heels and in need of a handout plane. We could buy 1 million planes. In fact, it is a Boeing plane that the Qataris have dangled in front of Trump. So in a basic way, we actually sold it to them in the first place. And that's the way Trump would be thinking of it anyway, right? We're here because one guy, Donald Trump, really, really likes luxury things. And beyond liking luxury things, he likes people giving him luxury things. Having to buy takes half the fun out of it. In any real sense, for the U.S. government, having to retrofit the Pimpmobile plane is more trouble than it's worth. And I mean, really a lot more. This is about Trump wanting the Pimpmobile plane. There is a side light to this lurid drama worth noting. Trump's campaign against foreign students in the U.S. has been at least nominally focused on support for Hamas among the protests against the Israeli onslaught on Gaza. Butler and Secretary of State Marco Rubio has several times recently said that Hamas supporters are not welcome in the U.S. and will be expelled. And yet, the Qataris are quite literally the top bankrollers of Hamas. I mean, they were and still are, and I guess the second highest bankrollers of Hamas turns out to have been the Netanyahu Israeli government, because for various reasons, but okay. But this is a good point, right? The Qataris are literally the top bankrollers, probably by much, much more, of Hamas, and they speak for them and help them negotiate with the great powers and with Israel. It reminds me of a story about Karl Lueger, the populist mayor of Vienna at the turn of the 20th century, who was one of the key articulators of and arguably one of the creators of mass political anti-Semitism. And yet, Lueger would himself dine with and socialize with members of the capital's Jewish elite. There's a famous story in which someone asks Lueger, you're the big enemy of the Jews, and yet you socialize with them, and some are your friends. How can you justify that? To which Lueger is said to have responded, I decide who's a Jew. Okay. Like Lueger, like Trump, he'll decide who's a Hamas supporter. I guess that's basically it. If you're a Hamas supporter who's extremely, extremely wealthy, and I'm really impressed by all your wealthy stuff, and you give some of it to me, then I don't mind. Of course they're Hamas supporters, but that's because they're, Arabs. The kids in these colleges, but they're Arabs. They're Palestinians in many cases. That's why they support. But they're poor and they can't give me everything. It's just basically what it comes down to. But this and everything we've discussed to this point brings us to the key recognition. This whole trip is really about Trump, along with the Saudish and the Qataris. It's about doing business. And that's true. And like we were saying, this is a traveling trunk show. He just took a bunch of rich people and rich CEOs who he considers to be deal makers and who could provide stuff that he thought the sheikhs of Araby, which is probably a fairly racist way of putting it, might be interested in buying chunks of or investing in. They might not even really be interested in the product, but they might be interested in buying a piece of the company because they're global companies and they like investing in stuff. So come with me and you can work a deal that way. That's true. And by the way, also listen to this is a good reminder about how we treat Saud-ish Arabia and talk about the Saud family versus the Saud-ish area, which is owned by them and which disguises itself as a modern country. Like Qatar is run the same way. It's a monarchy, and the Al Thani family owns and runs it, just the way the Al Saud family owns and runs Saudi Arabia, but they didn't name the country after themselves. So, right, even in that sentence, right, that the trip is really about Trump along with the Saudis and the Qataris. It's interesting just the way that, those things go together. And we just think, oh, well, the country, Saudi Arabia. And now we know from hammering this over and over again, it's a little different, right? The Saudi-ish, right? Arabia. owned by the Sauds. Like, really, that should be like Tanya instead of Qatar. I don't know what Qatar actually means, if anything, but I should probably look into that. In the same way with the United Arab Emirates, that's just got a modernized, they went out of their way to name it something like modern countries. But anyway, I just found that interesting. But back to the other point, this whole trip there isn't foreign policy going on. It's about doing business, Trump's business. And there's another aspect of it. You notice Elon's there, and so is his rival, OpenAI's Sam Altman. And it's actually a similar cast of characters to the ones we saw at the inauguration. Jensen Huang, head of NVIDIA, is there too, as is, it says as is Ruth Porat, the president and chief investment officer of Alphabet, the parent company of Google. Bezos isn't there, but the new CEO of Amazon, Andrew Jassy, is. The Times piece shows a genuinely staggering list of CEOs who are part of this trip, the CEOs of IBM, Boeing, Palantir, Halliburton, Citigroup, and a bunch of others. Now, in fairness, trade delegations have always played a role in these visits, but this is at a totally different level. In fact, if you step back, you see that this entire visit isn't mostly about U.S. foreign policy at all. Trump is bringing his CEOs, and everyone is cutting deals. And as the top dog, Trump is cutting his too. And to be clear, not as president of the United States, but as Trump. Eric Trump has already been in Qatar, inking the whole slew of new deals with the country's royal family. And here, bringing the IBM and Apple and Google and all of them with him. Any deals that they cut, he'll be saying, of course, the only reason you got that deal was me. You should give me a taste of that deal, or whatever favor he might want to call in later on. This is the right way to understand the 747 Pimpmobile gift, quote unquote gift. It's basically a sweetener to get a whole series of business and consummated relationships over the finish line. And yes, a few of them are tied to the U.S. government. In a real sense, the sales of military hardware are the payback for the personal business deals. Calling it a bribe almost doesn't do it justice. It's more like the decked out Maserati one Fortune 50 CEO gives to another after they ink a $100 billion merger, a kind of token of appreciation for a vastly larger transaction, which in the case of Trump involves subverting U.S. foreign policy to the interests not only of Trump's pocketbook, but cementing his power within the U.S. If Trump can use his power as president to cut in all the big CEOs on the money geyser in Saudi Arabia, you can bet that they are going to stay securely on his side in the U.S. If we step a bit further back still, we see this is where the meaning and the symbolism of the murderer's row of tech oligarchs at the inauguration really comes into fruition. This is government at home and abroad of, for, and by the oligarchs. Which, by the way, if Alyssa Slotkin doesn't want me to say oligarchs, fine. We'll focus on Trump wanting to be king. It's another reason why he likes those folks. Even the ones who bankroll Hamas. They're kings, right? They're kings. They get it. That's basically the big difference here. They're his kind of people, right? They get it. And they're Trump's kind of guys. That's the actual conclusion. For a second there, we lost track of the thing. I pressed the wrong button, the thing disappeared, and I had to jump back into it. But that's basically it. And I thought that was, it was fairly obvious, and I think it was probably in the back of everyone's mind, but I think he gave voice to the concept in a helpful and clarifying way. All right. Let's see. A couple other things that I really want to catch up on, and there are many. There's the long read stuff. There's things that should have been on the record and we haven't gotten on the record yet. Oh, you know what? Here, we can do this one. The other day, the pre-recorded show, Wednesday, I almost took a bigger detour when I was going over the list of CEOs, et cetera, who are on this trip. This is still transitional. And I hit upon the name on the list of Dina Powell. And it occurred to me that I was like, this is somebody whose name rings a bell. Wasn't this a friend of Ivanka's at some point? And she was and is. But she was a fascinating figure. And in fact, I read a whole bunch more about her into the recording and had to edit it out for time. I probably just should have kept the whole recording somewhere. And I'm sure I could dig it out. But I kept the link to Dina Powell's Wikipedia profile and thought we should go back and read this thing. She's kind of a fascinating figure, just in terms of she's really had this tremendous meteoric rise, a term to which I ordinarily object because meteors fall, not rise. But nonetheless, the term we use, meteoric rise. And while everyone seeks to be upwardly mobile, and some people have a leg up in these things, or they get a leg up by finding themselves in the right place at the right time, she's really parlayed her career brilliantly and has some real wild connections. And I thought it might be interesting to read quickly, if there is a way to read quickly through her Wikipedia profile, just right from the beginning. It is one thing we'll point out. Dina Powell, who is also now known as Dina Powell McCormick, her second marriage is actually to, what's his name? The senator, the new senator from Pennsylvania, the guy who accidentally got himself elected there, McCormick. So she's the wife of a senator, and that's like not mentioned at all. And by the way, there were hardly any, if any, elected officials along with Trump on this trip. Like usually they disguise these business junkets as, a sideline to a foreign policy trip. And here it was just nakedly all about business. But anyway, Dina Powell, also now known as Dina Powell McCormick, was born, by the way, Dina Habib in Egypt. So that's interesting all by itself. But her later history makes it clear, I guess, why she was included in the trip. Not just because she's the CEO of something, but anyway, so she's, Arabic fluent. Born in Egypt, she's described here as a financial executive, philanthropist, and political advisor, best known for having been the United States Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategy to Donald Trump in his first term. Born in Cairo, came to the U.S. as a child, lifelong member of the Republican Party, it says here. She became involved in, and this is a weird way of putting it, Texas-oriented Republican politics during her time and following her time at the University of Texas at Austin. I don't know what the gist is supposed to be there. Texas-oriented. She became involved in Texas Republican politics when she lived in Texas. Anyway, during the George W. Bush administration, Powell served in several roles, first as assistant to the president for presidential personnel, and then as Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs and Deputy Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs and Public Diplomacy. And once you get a foot in the door, you can bounce around to all sorts of different jobs. And that's cool. It builds your resume. In 2007, Powell joined Goldman Sachs, so that's a new level for her, where she became managing director and eventually a partner at the firm, and I'm sure there's a lot of them, but still, as well as president of its nonprofit subsidiary, which I didn't even know they had, the Goldman Sachs Foundation, where they, assuage their guilt for taking all the money by giving some of it back to someone, but mostly to other rich people for their projects for helping poor people. In that capacity, she ran the foundation's 10,000 Women program. I don't know exactly what that is, but a quick click over there. 10,000 Women is a program organized by Goldman Sachs and the foundation with the goal of helping to grow local economies by providing business education, mentoring, and networking, and access to capital to underserved women entrepreneurs globally. Very nice. Whatever. That comes up again. That's why I gave it a little more time. Powell joined the Trump administration during the transition the first time around and remained thereafter as Deputy National Security Advisor. She had a role in determining the first year of the administration's foreign policy, especially in regard to Middle East policy. She was also an assistant to the president and senior counselor for economic initiatives, a position demanding about 20% of her time. That comes up a couple of times too, weirdly. That continued after her security appointment. She left the administration in early 2018. Returning to work for Goldman Sachs, where she was a partner, served on the management committee. In October 2018, Powell was a leading candidate for the position of U.S. ambassador to the UN, but withdrew from consideration and remained with the financial firm. In 2022, she was named the new chair of the probably inaptly named Robin Hood Foundation, beginning in 2023. I'm not even sure what that is either, but that's a charitable organization which attempts to alleviate problems caused by poverty in New York City. Probably not by stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, but I guess you're supposed to have that idea in mind. It doesn't appear to be inherently terrible, but yeah. Anyway, whatever. It's a thing that she did. Powell departed Goldman Sachs in 2023 to join BDT and MST Partners. It's a merchant bank headquartered in Chicago and New York City, about which I know nothing, but you can read about them also in Wikipedia. On April 11, 2025, Powell was appointed to Meta's board of directors, effective April 15, 2025. Early life and education. Born in Cairo, as we said, to a middle-class Egyptian Coptic Christian family, not Muslim, but Coptic Christian. Her father, a captain in the Egyptian army. Mother had attended American University in Cairo. Parents brought her younger sister and her to the U.S. as children. Habib arrived knowing no English, so we deported her. The Habib family settled in Dallas, Texas, where they had relatives within the Coptic community. The parents ran a convenience store, so she's really made out. And her father also worked at times as a bus driver and in real estate, while her mother sometimes pursued a career in social work. A third daughter was born once the family was in North America, and automatic citizen. Except Donald Trump says no. Habib learned English at school, but her family insisted that she be raised with the Egyptian culture and language, and hence she's fluent in Arabic. Most of her parents' actions, she later said, I so desperately wanted a turkey and cheese sandwich with potato chips, but instead I always got grape leaves and hummus and falafel, not even in a cool brown paper bag. And now, of course, I appreciate it so much that I did. Each of the family members born abroad became naturalized citizens of the U.S. She attended prep school for girls at the Ursuline Academy of Dallas, graduated in 91, went to UT at Austin, enrolled in the Plan 2 honors program. I don't even know what that is. Blah, blah, blah. Community service. Delta, Delta, Delta sorority. Delta, Delta, Delta. Can I help you? Help you? Help you? I don't know whether they really say that, but they should. Habib helped pay for school by working as a legislative assistant for two Republican members of the Texas State Senate, Ike Harris and Jerry E. Patterson. With them, she worked on a number of policy matters, including juvenile justice reform. She keeps doing more. She's very much into Republican politics and graduated from Texas with honors, bachelor's degree. It just says in humanities from its College of Liberal Arts in 1995. So really, at this point, she should be like squarely disqualified for service in the Trump administration. And yet, early political career, Habib had applied to and been accepted to law school. However, in part due to her Arabic fluency, she received an offer of a year-long internship with Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson. She deferred the school, accepted the internship, moved to D.C., never returned to law school. She eventually takes a job with Dick Armey, the Republican majority leader in the House. She worked on as a member of the leadership staff for 4 years, then took a job with the RNC, Director of Congressional Affairs, helped find positions for Republicans in lobbying firms. As part of this role, she became involved in the George W. Bush presidential campaign in 2000, married Richard C. Powell, a public relations professional, in 1998. He became managing director of Quinn Gillespie and Associates, Ed Gillespie, one of Greg's favorite guys. Later became employed by Teneo, as president of Teneo Strategy, whatever that is. Couple had 2 daughters born to them, bought a Upper East Side Manhattan apartment for almost $4 million. Hotsy-totsy. Moves on to the White House and White House Personnel Office. It says here, while working at the RNC, spotted, however that is to be interpreted, by Clay Johnson III, who would become in charge of hiring for the George W. Bush administration. So she probably had a hand in politicizing the U.S. attorney's offices there as well. Beginning in January 2003, Johnson moved up, and elsewhere in the administration, Powell took on his role, serving as assistant to the president for presidential personnel, a senior staff position in the White House. So now she's really moving up. At age 29, she was the youngest person ever to hold this position. But didn't they give it away to an even younger dude in this administration? Anyway, the caddy. Let's see. Some of the recommendations she made for U.S. State Department put her in good stead with Condoleezza Rice. She went on to work for a while at the Department of State, went back to Goldman Sachs, managing director, on and on and on. With the Trump administration. Oh, yes, right. Let me just jump down there. Trump administration time. Powell had no relationship, apparently, with Trump and his family until the 2016 election. Powell received a call from Ivanka Trump, who was interested in the metrics by which the success of 10,000 women had been judged. I guess she wanted to do something similar in her father's administration and called up Dina Powell for advice. Not a bad idea. She thus became involved with the incoming administration's transition period, particularly with regard to empowerment of women and girls and the potential of female entrepreneurship. Again, should be on the outs by all rights. Anyway, she began serving as senior advisor to the president for entrepreneurship, economic growth, and the empowerment of women, all of which is now illegal, just to give you some idea of all this. And then at some point, she divests her interests from Goldman Sachs because of her service in the administration. Another idea for which she should probably be exiled. Some joint projects with America and Canada, another reason why Trump should hate her, and yet instead she's on the trip. Let's see. If I can quickly work in here this section, it'll help explain why all this time was spent on this. Powell was visible outside of that scope of her role when she was part of a meeting between the president and the Saudi defense minister at the time, Mohammed bin Salman. How do you like that? She subsequently shared responsibility for overseeing a $200 billion amount of U.S.-Saudi arms deals, and that was the only arguably foreign policy objective of the whole trip this time. She continued to assist Ivanka Trump. Powell's network of contacts in the financial, corporate, and government worlds was considered a valuable asset. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So one thing you might be interested in looking at the Wikipedia site is how much of this, if any, was written by Dina Powell or people associated with her. I mean, this is extraordinarily detailed stuff for somebody who, according to the Wikipedia talk page on her, is really basically considered a low importance person. They have this, I mean, this is sort of behind the scenes and it's, I guess, subjective, but this article is rated C class in Wikipedia's content assessment scale. It is of interest to the following wiki projects. It is labeled as a business profile. This is of low importance. As a Christianity profile, low importance. Conservatism, low importance. Egypt, low importance. American politics, mid importance. United States, Texas / government, mid importance. Women, it doesn't even get a rating. Women in business, low importance. And yet, this is a really, I guess, certainly impressive profile that she puts up here. So, that she's established for herself. And it's easy to see why how she finds herself, on this trip. Oh, gosh. All right, well, we're back in lag territory, and the combination of desperate clicks to try to get back to where we were has brought us to closing Firefox entirely. So we'll have to rebuild our profile here and get everything back online. Scroll back down to what was going on in the Trump administration with Dina Powell. I promise you, this is, this doesn't solve any mysteries, but it's just sort of interesting, and I have a feeling we're going to have to keep an eye on Dina Powell and what's going on there. All right. So it's interesting that she's involved in American-Canadian joint programs at some point. Forms a relationship again with Justin Trudeau while he was Canadian Prime Minister. That should have her on the outs. But she's close with Mohammed bin Salman and intimately involved in prior arms deals between the Trump administration and MBS. So naturally, you bring her along at this point. Let's see. And then it does say, once again, I told you this was weird and it came up again. Even after being appointed Deputy National Security Advisor in March of 2017, Powell still spent 20% of her time in this, her initial role. Interesting. The evaluating new hires for the administration is that other role. So she's always remained intimately involved, at least in the first administration, with the hiring, the best people, all that stuff. In June of 2017, Powell was a key advisor on a trip to Canada to improve economic issues with the nation. That didn't last long, of course. And again, this should have her on the outs. Now, listen to this. Her meteoric rise isn't over. Powell was on the short list for White House Chief of Staff. What? To replace Reince Priebus. Ivanka and her husband were pushing for Powell. Reportedly, the president was happy with Powell's performance so far and considered the idea, but in July of 2017 went with Homeland Security Advisor and former General John F. Kelly instead. Now he's kicking himself over it and taking Dina Powell on trips with him. Then she goes to the National Security Council for a while. She was named Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategy. In what sense is she qualified for the role? Oh, I don't know. She's been around government. That's just one of those things that happens. All the while retaining her economic position as well. The impetus for this assignment came from the recently named National Security Advisor, at that point H.R. McMaster, who himself was responding to people outside the administration suggesting her name. Ivanka. April 2017, New York Times labels Powell a rising star in the national security establishment, an appellation echoed by Vogue magazine, while the Associated Press wrote that Dina Powell has quietly established herself as a White House power. But then we forgot all about her, interestingly enough. So, okay, she spends some time at the National Security Committee. She survives the McMaster disaster, essentially. And just skipping down here for her part, Powell assisted McMaster in developing working relationships with various members of the cabinet. Powell attempted to guide McMaster on the best ways to have useful interchanges with the chief executive himself. She's a Trump whisperer for McMaster, and then he gets fired. Regarding the May 2017 report of a Donald Trump revelation of classified information to Russia, during which Powell was present in the room, she stated, how did she save her career? This story is false. However, this soon-to-be infamous unannounced meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Ambassador Sergei Kislyak was, as it happened, where Trump was later revealed to have disclosed Israeli intelligence. While she dissembled to cover up the president's error, she later admitted to having revealed these secrets, or he later admitted to it. So she is in the room when he spills the beans on Israeli intelligence to the Russians. She denies it happens. That's how she's on this trip now. I protected you, even though you later went ahead and said, I can survive anything, and admitted that you did, in fact, spill the beans. She was among the top officials escorting the chief executive on his first foreign trip. Everyone remembers where his first foreign trip of his first administration was. Same damn place he is now, Saudi Arabia. She had been heavily involved in planning for the Middle East portion of the trip. She was involved in several negotiations with Middle Eastern parties, where she was sometimes the only woman at the table. This does sound like she wrote a lot of it. Anyway, or was interviewed for a lot of it. She also ensured that one of the headliner's speeches made references to women's rights in Saudi Arabia. Fat lot of good it did. Powell was one of the key figures in securing the release of Egyptian aid worker Aya Hijazi in 2017. One of those accompanying on the trip to Poland and Germany toward the 2017 G20 Hamburg summit. Again, this is very stilted writing, so if she did write it, it's not a good job. She went next on the Middle East with the Kushner peace process trip. Imagine that. This took place in late August 2017. Also made the involvement of envoy Jason. This is so terribly written. This is right. This took place in late August 2017 and also made the involvement of envoy Jason Greenblatt. Whatever. By this time, the likes of Bannon and Gorka were gone from the White House while Powell was still in an ascendant force there. The trip was viewed positively within the administration, continued to think that Israeli-Palestinian peace deal was achievable. Well, this was followed by a secret trip to the Middle East made by Kushner, Powell, and others. By November 2017, she was part of the Core Four, drafting a plan for comprehensive Middle East peace, along with Kushner, Greenblatt, and U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman. Given that the other three were Orthodox Jews with various ties to Israel, Powell was the only native-born Egyptian, which again should be getting her deported right about now, but they don't do that for some reason for her. Her departure, December 8th, 2017, it was announced that Powell would be leaving the administration in early 2018, subsequently elaborated to be after a delayed vice presidential trip to the Middle East had been initiated. Terrible writing. Powell planned to return to her life in New York with a goal of spending more time with her family. White House spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders stated that Powell is a trusted advisor. All right, this is all puff and PR stuff at this point. And she takes care to point out that the decision to leave was hers. She wasn't fired. Possibilities of returning are floated in 2018 following the sudden resignation of Nikki Haley as U.S. ambassador to the UN. Powell was reported to be one of the leading candidates to replace her. Indeed, the president said so explicitly, but I guess it didn't happen. Ultimately, Powell announced to friends that time was not right for her or her family or Goldman Sachs. So, whatever. He picked someone else, and then she goes on to become a Harvard Kennedy School fellow. Again, should have her on the outs. Returns to Goldman Sachs. Powell departs Goldman Sachs in May of 2023 to join BDT and MSD Partners. That's what's listed on the manifest this time. She became a partner there. So for this trip, she's supposedly there representing them. Richard and Dina Powell divorced in 2017. Remember, she was leaving to spend more time with her family, and then she divorced her family. Oh, well. Anyway, by 2018, that's pretty quick, she was engaged somehow to financier and former government official Dave McCormick. And in 2019, she and McCormick were married. At times, Powell has gone by Dina Powell McCormick. Afterwards, it's noted here in stilted language, McCormick ends up in the Senate. But it's interesting. They just don't really talk a great deal about that. Powell became strongly involved, accompanying him to Mar-a-Lago in an attempt to secure an endorsement for him. Powell's ties to the former president were considered crucial in potentially counteracting some negative remarks that McCormick had made about the former president in the past. There were reports in the press, denied by some, that Powell hinted that McCormick's rival, Dr. Oz, would be unelectable due to his Muslim background. Some of those close to Powell expressed dismay that she would make such an argument given her own background, but she's not Muslim. Oh well. The couple emphasized the fact that of Oz's dual citizenship. The efforts did not have success as the endorsement went to Oz. The Republican primary election was very close, went to the recount phase, but in the end, McCormick lost to Oz. Oh, okay. Is that right? Okay. For some reason, I was like, well, let's go on. Okay, so right, then there's the second attempt, not a strong primary there. Powell was part of the campaign announcement, and then he defeats incumbent Bob Casey Jr. in the general election. It's like a tiny part of her profile. Then more stuff being chairs of various foundations, awards and honors, et cetera, et cetera. That's way too much about Dina Powell, but it is interesting that they just sort of slip her into the manifest there, and we're like, oh, Dina Powell, that rings a bell. So, in the middle of all of this, she's also a bit of an arms dealer. So, that's kind of weird. I just found that sort of interesting, and, well, I don't know if it was really worth the time necessarily, but I spent it anyway. Got a note here along the way from Rosalind McGregor, who is saying the more things change, the more they stay the same. I guess this is equivalent to Trump's trip to Saudi Arabia. This is a picture of President Harding. I think they're on a camping trip here, which, by the way, I have something to tell you about that one. Out camping with Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and what's Firestone's first name? All right, well, Felicia Firestone. No, it wasn't it. But I can't remember offhand, but probably everybody else knows. This picture of them in camp chairs here, I think I've seen the picture, and I think I've seen the camping equipment at the Thomas Edison Museum in New Jersey, West Orange, New Jersey, my hometown, to be precise. And I got a little peek in the storage eaves of the museum there at one point for various reasons. And the camping equipment was there. I guess he was just sort of an avid camper when he wasn't busy trying to invent crap. Anyway, I thought that was interesting and an interesting tie to what Rosalind had sent us. All right, let's see. I'm headed back to Pocket, which I have to reopen. And now on to other interesting subjects. How about this one? Let's throw this in here. Not that, I don't know. Whatever. It seems interesting. It's from the Bulwark. So I'm going to the Bulwark by myself without Greg bringing me there. And it's to bring you this news. Trump White House sharpens its knives for who? The owner of Politico. And we keep thinking about, we always regard Politico, not always, but we frequently regard Politico as something of a pro-Trump outlet. And they kind of are in the sense that they occupy that middle of the road space, I guess, or they think that they do, but they love giving him the benefit of the doubt, sane washing his stuff the way the New York Times does. That sort of quasi pro-Trump in their approach to things. They're not an outwardly, overtly pro-Trump operation like One American News. But anyway, how is it that the knives are out for Politico's owner? Well, he's not just the owner of Politico, and I think that's what does it. An article about Donald Trump Jr. has sent MAGA world into a tizzy. And guess what? This is timely because the article is the one that we began reading and just discussed a little bit the other day. And didn't get to read all the way through, and maybe that would now be worth our time. But this was the one that compared Don Jr. So Don Jr. is the new Hunter Biden, and though we objected to the comparison, it was clearly not a good article for Don Jr. It was basically about this is how corrupt he's become. He was already corrupt, and this is how much worse it's become trading on his father's name, especially when his father is quite overt and trading on his own name. Anyway, they have said as much, I guess, in Politico and the other publications that they own, which I think is Business Insider, which I guess was responsible for that article that we mentioned. Yeah, Business Insider, Don Jr. is the new Hunter Biden. So maybe we'll read a little bit more from that. But first, let's give it context. The Bulwark's Will Sommer writes this piece. An article about Donald Trump Jr. has sent MAGA world into a tizzy. So we'll want to read about that tizziness, I guess. So this begins with a subheader or a subsection title, a different type of playbook, Politico and his playbook. It's illustrated with a photo of the CEO we're talking about, the CEO of Axel Springer. Remember, that's a media conglomerate, German in ownership, and so's this guy, German. Matthias Dopfner is my best guess at the pronunciation. Dopfner. Perhaps a little weirdness on the O with the umlaut. The Trump administration is sending aggressive signals about launching a potential federal investigation into who this time? The company that owns Politico and Business Insider. Why? As retaliation for an article scrutinizing Donald Trump Jr.'s business interests. You're under arrest, basically. In a Tuesday night story, little noticed outside of right-wing media, though we noticed it, Breitbart reporter and Trump administration favorite Matthew Boyle wrote that the White House was furious at German media conglomerate Axel Springer. Oh, I'm sorry. That story. The story that the Trump administration was furious was little noticed, although I think we could have guessed at it. This is an article that's bad about Trump. They're going to be furious at somebody. At issue was a Business Insider story titled Don Jr. is the new Hunter Biden. In the 1,500-word long item, reporter Bethany McLean focused on Don Jr.'s venture capital fund, 1789 Capital, primarily via a collection of quotes from some ethics experts and an anonymous Wall Street investor concerned that the fund could present a conflict of interest. Of course it does. It's the whole point of it. The story was relatively anodyne. Maybe we won't read it. Certainly in a world where the president is poised to receive a $400 million luxury jet from a foreign country and boosting a meme coin by offering White House access. And Business Insider isn't the first media outlet to compare Don Jr. to Hunter Biden, but Boyle wrote that the Business Insider article had opened up Axel Springer to a, quote, massive federal review of its ownership, quoting an unnamed outside White House advisor as calling Politico and Business Insider a German influence operation. Wow, Politico. On the outs. Talk about your all-time backfires, Boyle wrote. Instead of landing a major hit on the president's son, a German-backed publication has drawn massive federal attention onto its foreign ownership structure and lobbying activities before the federal government. Oh no, not that. The idea that the White House is only now discovering that two major digital media outlets are owned by a German company, purchases that were well covered in the business press at the time, is ridiculous. Less so is the possibility Boyle's piece raises, that the Trump administration might retaliate against Axel Springer. Boyle even goes on to quote an unnamed White House official, agreeing with his theory that Axel Springer is under the gun. The official suggested that the Business Insider story could amount to illegal foreign political meddling. Really? A defining characteristic of the Trump 2.0 administration has been its overt attempts to use the tools of government on and threats of lawsuit against major news outlets. That, by the way, when it was happening, when they thought it was happening to them on the Republican side, was called weaponization of government, about which we do have more. We'll see if we can get to that. Maybe that's the transition to make. It has often worked. Networks have made multi-million-dollar settlements with Trump. Newspapers like the Washington Post have dramatically revamped their editorial pages in apparent attempts at currying favor. A global media giant, Axel Springer, had worked to build inroads with Trump. The company is, by the standards of journalism, pretty conservative. Axel Springer employees in Europe are required to take a pledge to support Israel. And in 2020, CEO Matthias Dopfner asked some of his employees to gather and pray for Trump's reelection. Whoops, got your face eaten. But any goodwill it had with the administration is at risk of dissipating. On Wednesday night, right around the time the Breitbart story ran, well-connected Trump world lobbying firm Ballard Partners. Remember, though, that we just read sometime in the last week that they're now also on the outs. There's no understanding this group. It's all just transactional, I guess, like Dina Powell. But Ballard Partners, a lobbying, where was this? So Wednesday night, right around the time Breitbart ran its story, well-connected Trump world lobbying firm Ballard Partners filed a lobbying disclosure announcing it dropped Axel Springer as a client, a move first reported by website Florida Politics. The contract, which started just last month, had already earned Ballard $80,000, but the firm was apparently willing to forego it over anger with both the Business Insider story and because of Politico reporting that the lobbying firm had been iced out of the administration. Now, that's interesting. So it was a Politico piece that we read saying Ballard was on the outs. Ballard drops Politico and floats the story that Axel Springer and Politico are on the outs. So pretty good reason to doubt both stories to some extent, right? The Business Insider piece on Don seemed to be such a gratuitous attack. There was no way the firm can continue in good faith to represent Axel Springer, a source close to Ballard told Boyle in a follow-up article. The White House, Axel Springer, Politico, Business Insider, and Ballard Partners all didn't respond to the writers here, requests for comment. This is not the first series of bad stories that Axel Springer has had to navigate during the Trump administration. A bizarre confluence of events earlier this year inspired a conspiracy theory on the right that USAID had been secretly funding Politico. They did drop that after a little while, didn't they? In reality, the agency, like others, had been paying for pricey government subscriptions to Politico's premium offerings, which it promptly canceled when word got out. But the latest round of controversy represents a much bigger potential threat. The loss of a small portion of Politico Pro revenue is minor compared to the price tag of defending against a potentially drawn-out government investigation into whether your organization amounts to a foreign influence peddling operation. Already, A number of Trump world figures are piling on after Breitbart's article suggesting a groundswell of support for just that type of investigation. Wow, is this true about Axel Springer? Right-wing figure Jack Posobiec, again in my face, posted on X, looking bad. Time to drop the hammer on Axel Springer, wrote former Trump advisor Jason Miller, the rapist who impregnates people and then tries to force abortion pills on them. Why has this article in particular, also a deadbeat dad, why has this particular article earned so much pushback? Based on Boyle's article, McClain and Business Insider's unforgivable sin appears to have been comparing Don Jr. to Biden's famously troubled son. Boyle spent much of the story disputing the idea that Don Jr. and his businesses are anything like Hunter Biden, calling the comparison ludicrous. First-term Trump official Cliff Sims agreed, telling Boyle that comparing the Biden scion to the Trump scion meant Business Insider is a, quote, disgrace to journalism. Only if you actually think the comparison is a good one, I would say, which we don't. All right. So I don't know. I mean, it would be kind of interesting to learn what revelations got them in such trouble. Although I don't know if it's the best use of our time versus getting some other stories on the record. But I'll refer you again to Don Jr. as the new Hunter Biden, the Business Insider piece about which has sparked so much or has created such difficulty now for the publishers. But it probably would be interesting to go over some of the details of exactly how egregious these the business dealings that they're making really are. I don't know. I feel like it leaves a hole if I don't follow up though. Let's make a quick read through of the rest of Bethany McClain's piece here. We started off reminding everybody Donald Trump Jr. has become a partner in a small investment startup, 1789 Capital. They started with $200 million, which isn't a lot in that space. And their biggest investment at the time before they really took off was $15 million into Tucker Carlson's new media company. But yet they had this vision of themselves as these grand operators, creating a parallel economy. Remember that? In investing in anti-woke businesses that align with MAGA values. So, he's not wandering off on his own or striking out on his own here. He wants to invest in the MAGA space, trading on his father's name. Ever since Trump Jr. joined 1789, its portfolio has begun to blossom. Let's see. Granted some shares in several coveted offerings, including SpaceX. Let's see. You have to be invited in on a lot of these things, and guess what? They were. They got invited in on Musk's artificial intelligence company launch XAI, as well as a handful of startups that have received or are vying for contracts from the Defense Department, headed, of course, by Commander-in-Chief Dad. Almost overnight, a VC firm involving the president's son, that one, has become a significant beneficiary of the federal bureaucracy, long derided by President Trump as the swamp. There's nothing wrong, they note here, with an investment company making bets based on its connections. That's the integral part of the VC game. There's no evidence yet that any of 1789's deals break laws prohibiting favoritism to individual contractors, but given the potential for creating a conflict of interest, the firm's investments have alarmed Washington insiders familiar with the process. And what's more, the Trump administration's lack of transparency, which they insist is in fact the most transparency ever, particularly around moves being made by Musk and Dodgy, makes it impossible to tell if the president's family is improperly making money by funneling government business to the companies it invests in. And like in Animal House, we did. That's the joke. This certainly raises serious concerns about the appearance of corruption because Trump's family is benefiting, said Laura Dickinson, law professor at George Washington, GW, who served as special counsel for the Defense Department, and goes on to say, when you look at the context of arbitrary cuts to other programs, it raises questions about whether preferential treatment is being given to family and others who curry favor with Trump. It's not just legal experts who have concerns about the money flowing to Don Jr. One veteran Wall Street investor, who has personally reviewed 1789's deals, say they enable the president's son to profit from the administration's actions, even if no contractors are given preferential treatment. It's a way for Mar-a-Lago to get paid, says the investor, who spoke on condition of anonymity for obvious reasons. Both the Trump Organization and 1789 declined requests for comment. One of 1789's biggest bets in its push to monetize MAGA has come courtesy of Musk, surprisingly enough. According to Bloomberg, the firm has invested more than $50 million in SpaceX and XAI, the kind of opportunity usually reserved, as they said, for deep-pocketed insiders, not tiny funds with no track record. The move comes at a time when the Trump administration, which has empowered Musk and Dodgy to redirect vast swaths of federal spending, has reportedly been moving to channel billions in taxpayer dollars to SpaceX for the use of its Starlink satellite system. Another major story in the last couple of days, thanks to ProPublica, right? In addition, the company has been awarded a $5.9 billion contract from U.S. Space Force to launch critical national security payloads. And now they're going to steal all the money out of Gambia. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Again, I'm mentally struggling with things that we haven't got time to put on the record here. So let's race through the rest of this just so you know what Don Jr. is up to, because I have a feeling that becomes important later on in the story as well. So, right, stealing all the money out of Gambia, we learned about from ProPublica. This is like a major initiative for the Trump administration. Get contracts for SpaceX. Whether launch capability or more commonly Starlink deals. So naturally, I guess what they're saying here is that Don Jr.'s VC company, his firm, investing heavily in SpaceX and XAI, and then just so happens that Dad is putting all of the weight of the United States government behind finding profit centers and forcing profits out of other countries' hands into Musk's hands, which is okay with him because a significant portion of the profits will then trickle down to Don Jr., and that makes him happy. So let's see, where else are we here? This deal announced April 4th makes SpaceX the Pentagon's leading launch provider all of a sudden, surpassing an industry rival owned by Boeing and Lockheed, because they won't give me free planes. Except they are giving you free planes because to you it's free. We're paying for it. That means as SpaceX benefits from government contracts, 1789 and the president's sons stand to share the wealth. 1789 is also investing in other companies being awarded lucrative defense contracts. Anduril, a highly regarded defense technology firm, and now raising up to $2.5 billion. The backers of that new fundraising round have not been revealed, but I, the writer here, was able to confirm from multiple sources that 1789 is among the investors. Anduril has thrived under the Trump administration. In February, the company won a $22 billion defense contract to provide soldiers with augmented reality goggles. Do they really need them? They're going to be playing Pokemon Go on the battlefield. That's crazy. A few weeks later, it beat out 9 competitors to win $642 million contract to build a network of anti-drone defenses for military bases. That sounds at least a little more necessary. Given the company's prospects, investors have been fighting to get shares of the company. But guess what? Don Jr. got a bunch. Axiom Space is next up here, a Houston company that's seeking a contract with NASA to build a successor to the International Space Station. And they've been in discussions with 1789 to raise at least $100 million in fresh equity. And in January, 1789 led a $60 million fundraising round for Firehawk Aerospace, a Dallas tech company focused on supplying the military with 3D printed rocket fuel, which I assume is the solid rocket fuel, but okay. 3D printed rocket fuel. Wow. In April, Firehawk landed a $1.25 million defense contract to conduct a study of its manufacturing systems. Study your own manufacturing systems. That's interesting. Sure, have a mill. That month, the company posted a photo on LinkedIn of its founder posing with General James Rainey, leader of the Army Futures Command. With them was the founder of Aeon Industrial, another defense contractor in 1789's portfolio, who had just received a weapons contract from Rainey's command. It creates a very complex ethics situation, says Scott Amy, the general counsel on the Project on Government Oversight, a leading watchdog group. If the son of the president is benefiting from these deals, even if there's a few degrees of separation, is there a level playing field? We just don't know. Don Jr.'s investments are a long way from the days when Washington got worked up over Jimmy Carter's brother marketing his own beer brand. I'm old enough to remember when it was completely shocking that the president's brother was selling Billy beer, says Nell Minow, M-I-N-1-N-O-W, the vice chair of Value Edge Advisors, who has served as the government attorney for the EPA, OMB, and the Justice Department. Back then, there was no suggestion of a connection to access or policy or contracts. It was just considered unseemly. With 1789, she adds, we've gone to a whole new level. This is a flashing red light of a conflict. Don Jr. is far from a passive bystander in 1789, or the Trump administration for that matter. According to Politico, he and his fellow partners at the investment firm have launched an invite-only club, we read about that, called the Executive Branch, that will cost more than $500,000 just to join. That's a hell of a cover fee, right? Located in Georgetown, the high-end club will enable business and tech moguls to schmooze with administration insiders behind closed doors and simultaneously create a source of potential deals. Deals, ding, 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 for 1789. Remember what deals mean for these guys. Even some insiders who've worked closely with Trump and his family see such efforts as improper. What they're doing is selling access to the president via the back door, says someone who knows the Trumps well, and you know how that will be taken by Trump. You need to pay to go in the front door and a lot more. Why are you paying some? Oh, my son? But eventually he'll get jealous of him too. Imagine for 1 second if Hunter Biden had opened a club while Joe Biden was president. Yeah. The Republicans would be not just screaming for his head, but for a complete and total dismemberment of his body. It's beyond hypocritical. Don Jr.'s involvement in 1789 bears an eerie resemblance to what Trump blasted Hunter Biden for doing, trading on his father's name to win lucrative business deals with countries like Ukraine and China. During the 2020 campaign, Don Jr. often offered to debate Biden, insisting that Hunter's nepotism far outstripped his own. I'm not going to say that I haven't benefited from my father's last name, just like Hunter Biden did, Don Jr. told Axios. That'd be foolish to say that, but I haven't benefited from my father's taxpayer-funded office. Now, though, as a freshly minted venture capitalist, Don Jr. is explicitly gearing up to cash in on the next 4 years of his father's presidency. In the 3 months since Trump was inaugurated, 1789 has raised some $500 million. That's just what? That's like 100 memberships in his thing. No, I guess it's more than that. 1,000. All right. Small potatoes, though. $500,000 to get into his club. According to Bloomberg, the firm is aiming to collect $1 billion for its first fund by the middle of this year and another $3 billion to $5 billion for a second fund next year. He has to have more than Jared, obviously, right? Whatever the legality of 1789's investments, it appears the president's eldest son stands to profit handsomely from the federal contracts his father's administration is handing out, even if there's no pro quo involved, there's still plenty of quid. So poor Eric Lipton, who doesn't see the quid pro quo and can't see the impropriety in all this. All right. So, yeah, a lot of other things to cover here. And let's see if we can run through a few more of them. I had said a couple of days ago that we were maybe saved by the bell from reading all the in-depth profiles of Ed Martin, victim, by the way, of the latest new Haktua girl, videoed spitting on him in the street as she passed by. Just as likely that she was actually fired from the DOJ as that she was just happened to be nearby. He's not that recognizable a figure, but she knew who he was. Anyway, we're not saved by the bell. Of course, Ed Martin will be installed elsewhere in the government, probably just elsewhere in the DOJ, even if he can't be U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. So, we may want to double back and read those profiles. And a good transition to that. Well, a good preparation of the ground for that, if we do that later, let's say, is this NBC News piece by Ryan Riley from just a couple days ago, May 13th, DOJ weaponization group being formed, by the way. Remember, we're against weaponizing both the government and in particular the Department of Justice. How dare you weaponize it? We're now going to have a weaponization group inside DOJ, not for the purposes of investigating Democratic or accusations that the Democrats weaponized the DOJ and undoing it, but to actually do it proactively now. I'm so old, I remember last week when that was so bad, but okay. DOJ, quote, weaponization, unquote, group will shame individuals that it can't charge with crimes, the new head says. This is where Ed Martin has landed. Now in charge of using the DOJ to attack people it will not be charging criminally or civilly in any capacity because they can't find a way to bring charges, but they just want to hurt those people. That's Ed Martin's new job. The subheader tells us, as Jeanine Pirro prepares, to become U.S. Attorney in D.C. on an interim basis, Trump loyalist Ed Martin is taking over the Justice Department's effort, which didn't exist, to investigate Trump's investigators. Now someone to finally organize this. The conservative activist named by President Donald Trump as the head of the Justice Department's weaponization working group said Tuesday, this is a pro-weaponization working group, said Tuesday he planned to, quote, name and, quote, shame. I don't know how he said it, that they ended up quoting only the word name and shame, not name and shame as a phrase, but to name and shame individuals the department determines, on what basis, no one knows, that it is unable to charge with crimes in what would amount to a major departure from longstanding Justice Department protocols. Okay, so yeah, I mean, on what basis do they think they can name and shame them? I'm not sure. But I know what basis on which they'll decide that they can't charge them with crimes. A legal basis. We could never prove this, or they didn't even do this. Well, if we can't charge them because they didn't do it, we can at least insinuate that they did. No, that's actually wildly inappropriate for the Justice Department, and you have longstanding policy prohibiting it. But to hell with that. Ed Martin described himself at a press conference as the, quote, captain of the group that is investigating prosecutors who launched past investigations into Trump and his allies. Yes, investigating the investigators. There are some really bad actors, some people that did some really bad things to the American people. And if they can be charged, we'll charge them. But if they can't be charged, I'll take over. We will name them, Martin said. And we will name them. And in a culture that respects shame, they should be people that are ashamed. And that's why he only quoted name and shame there. I gotcha. And so that's how I believe the job operates. There is no job, the captain of the weaponization team. They created it for him. But I guess that's what he's telling us he plans to do. And he thinks it's a presidential mandate at that. During Trump's first tenure, the justification given for Trump's firing of somebody else in the news today, former FBI Director James Comey, was that Comey had given a press conference in which he released, quote, derogatory information, unquote, about then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that was hard to believe right from the beginning. Well, I mean, he did do that, and it was a violation of DOJ policy, but it was always difficult to believe that Trump was firing Comey because of something he had done something bad he had done to Hillary Clinton. He didn't care about defending Hillary Clinton. He reveled in the fact that he released that information. And it was a hugely satisfying, I'm sure, to Donald Trump to fire Comey for his own reasons, but to blame it on reasons that he thought Democrats would say, okay, that's a good reason, not that they would believe it. Derogatory information sometimes is disclosed in the course of criminal investigations and prosecutions, but we never release it gratuitously. Then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, remember him, wrote in a memo adding that he believed Comey had given a textbook example of what federal prosecutors and agents are taught not to do. And he's right about that. No hero, but he's right. Martin's remarks came on his last full day as interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia on Tuesday. Remember, interim, not acting. Trump announced last week that he was naming Fox News host Jeanine Pirro as interim U.S. Attorney. Again, interim, not acting. Following Martin's 120-day tenure, instead making Martin the pardon attorney. He's also going to have 5 jobs. So Ed Martin is now the pardon attorney, which is insane. Also, Associate Deputy Attorney General, which, I mean, is also insane, but a little less directly insane. Like, we don't know what the hell that... There's a lot of weirdos in those jobs. Pardon attorney is nuts. And, of course, director, not captain, but director of the Weaponization Working Group that Attorney General Pam Bondi established at the Justice Department in response to one of Trump's executive orders. That group is due to examine work including that of former special counsel Jack Smith, any federal cooperation with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who prosecuted Trump's hush money case and won, and New York Attorney General Letitia James, who brought a civil case against the Trump Organization. The Justice Department's handling of cases related to the January 6th Capitol attack, and criminal prosecutions of anti-abortion activists, among other issues. And presumably now also the Tina Peters case as well. It's not mentioned here, but that too will get thrown on the pile. When it comes to the problem of weaponization, the first part of it must be transparency, Martin said. We have to show our fellow Americans what went on, because when you hide it and then you prosecute, you look like your target. That's what the Biden administration, they didn't tell you when what they were doing. They just targeted people. Highly dubious. Justice Department protocols state that officials generally shouldn't confirm the existence of or otherwise comment on ongoing investigations. Martin said it was important to get the truth, quote unquote, the truth out when asked whether his past comments and the plans he laid out on Tuesday would run afoul of those protocols. Well, yes, they would. They're directly in conflict with those protocols. But he says it's okay because it'll be the truth, you see. I will say that the prosecutor's role, and at this moment in our history, is to make clear what the truth is and get that out, Martin said. It can't be that the system is stifling the truth from coming out because of some procedure, like the ability to actually charge somebody with something and make it stick. Martin said he would have a more public-facing role as director of the Weaponization Working Group. So that's pretty amazing as it is. He was using the interim U.S. Attorney's Office platform as a public sounding board anyway. So this, I guess, will be less constrained. Martin said he would have a more public-facing role. When I was asked to switch over here, yeah, we just want to move you around to a more important and interesting thing, not because no one wants you in the job permanently. When I was asked to switch over here, I was told, this job, you need to be more out more and talk about what's going on. So I think we'll be a little bit more outward facing in terms of talking about what's happening, Martin said. And now, having seen him spat on in public, we know why he always goes everywhere wearing a trench coat. It's an anti-spit device. Martin has no prosecutorial experience when Trump named him to the U.S. attorney position on Inauguration Day, the same day that the president mass pardoned January 6th defendants, many of whom were Martin's clients, of course. Soon, some prosecutors who worked on capital attack cases were fired. Martin opened up a probe into the office's handling of an obstruction charge used against some of the rioters, and Martin demoted others who played a key role in the prosecutions. And maybe it's mentioned in the other articles that are linked here, but it's not mentioned in this text that, again, some of those people were his clients. So he got them all pardoned, and he got the people who prosecuted them fired or demoted. And that's, I think, an important part of the story. So I thought I might bring that up because it occurred to me, hey, that's stuck in my memory. Let's share it. Now back to Pocket and see what other things need to be shared. And golly, there's an awful lot of them, and I'm trying to think about what's we have to put on record that we know that this is going on. Hopefully we can read a quick piece here from NBC News. We have had no discussion of it whatsoever on our program. Maybe Justice has covered it on his. Also from NBC News this time. Oh, this is an AP article being carried in NBC News. Cartel family members entered the U.S. in deal with Trump administration. Mexican security chief confirms. Video showed the family members walking across the border from Tijuana with their suitcases to waiting U.S. agents. They picked them up and drove them. They should have sent an Uber, but they didn't. Mexico's security chief confirmed on Tuesday that 17 family members of cartel leaders crossed into the U.S. last week. I thought that was maybe a bad idea. As part of a deal between a son of the former head of the Sinaloa cartel and the Trump administration. Mexican Security Secretary Omar Garcia Harfuch, is that right? Harfuch confirmed a report by independent journalist Luis Chaparro that family members of Ovidio Guzman Lopez, who was extradited to the United States in 2023, had entered the U.S. So I guess arrested, extradited here for trial. Maybe they are, I don't know, maybe he's going to cooperate with the government as a witness against others on the condition that they let his family into the United States. I don't know why they thought that was a good deal. It's just interesting in this, atmosphere. Guzman Lopez, this time including the accent mark that tells me it's Guzman, not Guzman. Guzman Lopez is one of the brothers left running a faction of the Sinaloa cartel after notorious capo Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was imprisoned in the U.S. Video showed the family members walking across the border from Tijuana with their suitcases to waiting U.S. agents. Rumors had circulated last week that the younger Guzman would plead guilty to avoid trial for several drug trafficking charges in the U.S. after being extradited in 2023. Garcia Harfuch confirmed the family members crossing in a radio interview and said it was clear to Mexican authorities that they were doing so after negotiations between Guzman Lopez and the U.S. government. He believed that was the case because the former cartel boss, whose lawyer said in January he had entered negotiations with U.S. authorities, had been pointing fingers at members of other criminal organizations, likely as part of a cooperation agreement. It is evident that his family is going to the U.S. because of a negotiation or an offer that the DOJ is giving him, Garcia Harfuch said. He said that none of the family members were being pursued by Mexican authorities, and that the government of the U.S., President Donald Trump, has to share information, with Mexican prosecutors, something it has not yet done, and presumably won't ever. The confirmation by Garcia Harfuch comes the same day that the U.S. Attorney General's office announced it was charging a number of top cartel leaders with narco-terrorism for the first time since the Trump administration declared a number of cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. While prosecutors declined to comment on the video of the family, U.S. Attorney Adam Gordon, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of California, and other officials sent a warning to cartel members, repeatedly citing the Sinaloa cartel by name. Let me be direct. To the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, you are no longer the hunters, you are the hunted. You will be betrayed by your friends, you will be hounded by your enemies, and you will ultimately find yourself in your face here in a courtroom. Really? Your face. Here in a courtroom in the Southern District of California, Gordon said. Okay, so lots of threatening language. Just it's news. We haven't mentioned it. I don't know what's going to come of it. This one, I don't have any sense of it becoming a big issue per se, but maybe it's just a minor hypocrisy story in the end. Not really sure. Other things happening on Capitol Hill. We have to take note of the fact that Republicans are having great difficulty bringing the big, beautiful bill to the floor and finding defections. And, of course, the thing is being parsed very carefully by friends and foe alike. And because it's so huge and he wants to do everything in one bill to protect as many controversial provisions as possible from filibuster in the Senate, it's full of garbage. And, of course, we're finding out just how much garbage. So much, in fact, that in many cases we find Republicans saying that they oppose passage of the bill as currently written. That's important. We got to get to that. That maybe feels like a Monday thing as we catch up on those things. Let me throw out this quick Politico hit. Maybe not the whole thing here, but at least the headline. Quote, first time we were hearing of them, unquote. The GOP megabill is packed with surprises for some Republicans. Senior Republicans on the House Energy and Commerce Committee were caught off guard by Medicaid provisions in their own bill. Ben Leonard, Meredith Lee Hill did that reporting for Politico back on the 14th, and that's the basic story of it. House Energy and Commerce Committee, 16 hours into a nearly 27-hour markup, when it became clear that top Republicans on the panel weren't clear on what key Medicaid provisions in the legislation they were actively debating would actually do. Now, of course, Republicans being confronted everywhere, town halls if they dare to have them or whatever, or confronted in the press. How come you are supporting gigantic cuts in Medicaid when that is so extremely unpopular all over the country? I think I saw some polling, maybe Greg was possibly discussing it as well. Every state in the union, the idea of cutting Medicare is underwater by dozens of points. It's like an 80% negative reaction to the idea of cutting Medicaid in almost every state of the union. And these guys are committing to gigantic cuts to it. And in many cases, they're out there denying that that's the case. And only now they're finding out, it is in this bill, the big, beautiful bill. What the hell are we going to do with this? So that's the big underlying story. Just want to throw out there that it's happening so that you're able to mull it over the weekend, and we'll read the substance of those stories and discuss them probably next week, I guess, although I don't even know. Now that I think about it, I should be looking at the daily whip report to find out where we are in the process here. And let me see, Democratic whip, here's the Thursday preview. So we're not on it yet, but eventually the big, beautiful bill is going to have to come to the floor. But I guess if it's facing scrutiny in the Energy and Commerce Committee, it's still a little ways away. All right. We also mentioned yesterday's story. Again, you should take a look at it over the weekend. Trump's sanctions on ICC prosecutors having brought the tribunal's work to a halt. Also, of some great interest as we get towards the end of the story here, cyberscoop.com with an interesting story by itself. Let's get the ad out of the way. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, won't tell Congress how many people it's cut from CISA. Remember the cybersecurity administration there. Representative Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, leveled that charge at Kristi Noem in a hearing on Wednesday. They just won't fess up to who's gone. JFK Jr. or RFK Jr. JFK Jr. is dead, of course, but QAnon expects that he will come back from the dead any time now. But RFK Jr. had a similar problem, I guess, or a similar claim. Both of them are denying in oversight hearings that anybody's been fired. How come you fired so many people from this, that, or the other agency or bureau within your department? I either just outright saying, no, I didn't, or maybe quibbling over the language. Well, they weren't fired. They were laid off, you see. So, come on now. Let's get past that nonsense. Anyway, that an important story and worth following as a, I guess as a storyline. But one more thing that I got to skip over to and try and shoehorn in so that you read a little bit about it over the weekend. This pretty interesting given our past problems with intelligence stuff. The Washington Post's quickie story here. Tulsi Gabbard fires or lays off, depending on how you look at it, leaders of intelligence group that wrote Venezuela assessment. You might remember that a couple of days ago we read the story that the intel community had basically come together with a report saying, yeah, these accusations that these people who were deporting on an emergency basis are connected to Tren de Aragua or MS-13. Not so much in the terms of evidence for any of that. It doesn't appear to actually be the case. Instead, appears to be a manufactured pretense for deporting people. Well, Tulsi Gabbard is taking care of that. She's been shocked by these revelations, and she's going to put a stop to it, by which I mean put a stop to the revelations. And Gabbard fires leaders of intelligence group that wrote the Venezuela assessment. The director of national intelligence fired top officials weeks after their group authored an assessment contradicting President Donald Trump's legal rationale for deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members. So now we're going to be, we're back to stovepiping unvetted intelligence. The intelligence that got vetted by the whole community and they've come to a real conclusion, that's being thrown out. The people who did the work of scrutinizing the intelligence and distilling it into a usable product are fired. We want to keep on people who will produce reports that say the president is right about everything and never contradict him. So that should be really good. And it only led to 9/11 last time. So, what could go wrong, I guess, is essentially the question. All right, we're at the end of our time together, but there are so many other things that we really need to catch up on. Perhaps next week we can dive into Republicans, the story from Slate. Republicans think they have a way to blow up the filibuster without anyone noticing. Well, we're going to have to take notice, but so far this week we haven't noticed. They're right about that. That and much more to come, of course. Justice Putnam will bring you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy following this program right here on Netroots Radio.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, here's what he's got for you. The Democratic Party hit record recruitment numbers for 2026. That seems like good news. Multnomah County health officials have confirmed one case of active tuberculosis at a middle school in southeast Portland, Oregon. That sounds like bad news for Portland, Oregon, and those poor kids. Plus, much more, of course, from around the country and around the world. We'll see you next week.